Is it on? Can you hear me? Yeah? Okay. So I have to sort of caveat that by saying we haven't quite donated it yet. I have promised many a time in many a public forum that we will do it, so we will actually do it, but we haven't done it yet. I actually promised that before management said it was okay, so they sort of had to say it was okay, which is pretty cool. But anyway. Mayfly is the platform we built, and because this is a Docker meetup, I'll talk a little bit more about the Docker things that are going on underneath the hood of that platform. My name is Maarten Dirkse. I work as a software developer at Bol on the tools team. I've been there for about 2.5 years, and it is an awesome place to work. And we're hiring. Sorry, Jamie. So, I give you the debut of our awesome logo. I can sense the enthusiasm. So, I never actually explained this before during a talk, but Mayfly, what Mayfly is an insect that lives for a day. They're called mayflies, and they have a season and they swarm somewhere in the north of the US. And they live for a day, and we chose this as our name because Mayfly, the platform, is all about short-lived user stories. They should only live for like 2-3 days at most. So that's why we chose the name Mayfly, but then we looked for a logo, and it turns out that Mayfly are these really nasty-looking bugs. So I spent a lot of time sort of searching the internet for a nice-looking, friendly Mayfly, and there's some woman who does drawings of bugs, and she made this drawing. And we actually bought this drawing as bol.com, paid $75 for it. And we now have to sort of give it to our art department and turn it into something that doesn't make you all go quiet when I show it. So, but this is the world premiere, so you were there. Right, so bol.com, just raise your hand if you do not know what bol.com is as a company. Excellent. That's what I like to see. Fantastic. So the way I explain it to everybody is we're the Dutch Amazon without the AWS. And we're actually building the AWS part as we speak, so it's cool. No, don't quote me on that, and don't make investment decisions based on that statement, please. Okay. Our IT department, which is the second largest department within Bol, is made up of Scrum teams, which each consist of about 4 to 8 different people. And we have testers, we have information architects, we have software architects, or rather information architects, or architects that actually architect systems, or system architects, I guess. And we have developers, and we have a service-oriented architecture, SOA, the good kind. That's just a little Dutch joke for the Dutch people here. There's like one guy who's seen this talk before and heard that joke before. Sorry about that. Sorry? Someone will explain it to you later. Don't worry about it. 130 services that all work together. It's like a huge distributed system. And we used to work in 2-week sprints. Or it was actually 4-week sprints, and we pretended it was 2-week sprints, but for the sake of argument, 2-week sprints. And as we were growing, when I joined the company, we had around 15 teams. Now we have close to 40. There were a bunch of bottlenecks that showed up in our infrastructure. And the biggest one was that we have a central shared test environment. So everybody in the company uses one shared test environment where they deploy the new versions of their software. And when something in that shared test environment breaks, it breaks for everybody. And that's a pretty big problem when you have 15 teams, but it becomes an unmanageable problem when you have 40+ teams. So the other problem we have is there's a huge amount of teams working in a single code base, and we have a whole bunch of, we're sort of doing the traditional monolith to service-oriented architecture transition, and we have a bunch of monoliths left in the landscape. And we were doing a giant release every 4 weeks. So we're not actually doing this anymore, but this is the situation we were in when we started doing Mayfly. So this was completely unsuited to a continuous delivery model. And we needed something that would allow us to adopt the continuous delivery model for our services, for our service architecture. So we came up, the tools team came up with Mayfly. And Mayfly is essentially the sort of bumper sticker slogan is user story-centric continuous delivery platform using Docker. It also uses a whole bunch of other things, but this is Docker Randstad, so it's using Docker. So it's based on the user story flow. At Bull, we use an agile method, which is essentially Scrum. And stories in Scrum have 3 stages: to do, doing, and done. Now, some people have like 10 different stages between to do and done, but this is the essential flow. Everything is either to do, in progress, or done. And based on that, we took this idea and then we said a user story, it has to have a short-lived feature branch. That's what Mayfly gives it. It has to have its own continuous integration environment. It has to be able to be accepted by the business, by whoever, independently of other user stories. And done means it's ready to be deployed to production. Or, in fact, done should mean it is on production. And done as in the definition of done, which is a Scrum thing, a Scrum concept. So Mayfly does this. It gives every story a feature branch, a continuous integration environment, an isolated environment in which to run that story, which is as production-like as we can make it without actually having it be production. And it also gives you a definition of done check. And I never raise your hand if you do not know what a definition of done is in the Scrum context. Oh, that's great. Okay. So the definitions of done are things that that are usually formulated and written down in paper, and we want it to actually work into the system that it will verify your definition of done before you can actually release something to production. And I'll show you how we do that in just a sec. And so we have everything as code, because everything should be version controlled, et cetera, et cetera. The build pipeline is code. The environment is stored as code, as a JSON file that describes your environment. The definition of done is actually stored as a configuration file, and obviously your tests are code because, well, tests are always code, or at least they should be treated as such. And all the code is stored in the application or the service repository. So the flow of a story. So I have a bunch of slides that explain how it works, but I'm actually just going to show you because that's a lot easier. And so a colleague of mine promised he would throw a goat into the volcano to sacrifice to the demo gods. But just in case, I have a ping running here that will tell me if I'm missing something. So we start out with an application that lives, it lives in our test infrastructure, but for the sake of argument, let's say it's in production. The same colleague that threw the goat into the volcano also designed this, so maybe give you a little bit of insight into his state of mind. Anyway, so this is actually running service, and we have in-house we have an internal framework called Backspin, which provides you with this sort of overview of your service, and it has something called self-diagnose, which allows you to do like health checks kind of thing. But this is me pressing F5 and proving to you that this is actually a working thing and not a screenshot, or not a static page, rather. And this project has a repository in Stash, in this case. And so the entire thing starts for us in Jira. Jira is our issue management system. It's where we create the stories that we work on. So I want to change this application. So I'm going to go ahead and create a story. So user story, Docker Randstad demo. So now here's actually a field that's added by the plugin that we wrote for Mayfly for Jira, where you can choose the continuous delivery application that you're going to work on. And this identifier actually allows the Mayfly system or the Mayfly platform to know which source code repository it should access to start working on the story. So I give it a description, and I create it. And then we have the Randstad demo. So, so far, this is just a normal Jira thing, a Jira screen, with the exception of 2 things. We have an assets screen and a definition of done screen. And the assets screen, well, what those are, I'll show you in a bit. So you start working on the story. So you say, start progress. All of a sudden, the assets tab fills up. So we've got a couple of things here. We've got the so-called logging asset, which is just a link to our Kibana infrastructure where you can view the logging for that particular user story environment. We've got the environment, which isn't up yet, but will be in a moment. and we've got the link to the stash repository, where we can actually go and see the branches. So this is DPI 5112. We reference everything by the user story key, which Jira gives you. 1 second, please. So if you look at the branches at the top here, I don't know if that's legible. At the top here, you can see that the branch has been created for the user story. And if we refresh this, it should give us, so it gives us the environment. So this, nice. Apparently one goat wasn't enough. Somewhat unfortunate. Well, I'll make a change and it should work. So what you do then, so what it should do, if we'd sacrificed enough goats, is it should copy the, oh, there we go, okay. Whew. Okay. So we got the same thing here, the exact same thing as we have running on our production. So it's just copied the environment, and what it's done under the covers is it's actually taken the Docker image that's used to run the production environment and also run it, and it now also runs it under this DNS name. And we have like the ugliest hack ever in Nginx to make this work, but it works. If you've ever, so we wrote Groovy and piped it through the Java Nginx, or no, the Clojure Nginx plugin to actually get this to work. And I'm sure there's like a much easier way to do it, but I don't know, it seemed like a good idea at the time. Anyway, it gives you the application name, which is DPIT in this case, and then it gives you the user story key and then an extension which is always the same, .mayfly.bool.com in this case. So that's what, if you know where your application is and you know your user story key, you can always find a running instance of your application in the infrastructure, because that's always how the URLs are structured. So then we go and change something. So we first pull in the code, or we pull in the branch rather. So we've got this new branch, and then we do checkout of the branch. Sorry about that. And then we edit the index file, and then instead of hello world, we say hello Docker Randstad. We save it. We go back to the command line. We see that there's a change. We say git commit demo time. Then we push it. And now there's a, so what it's now done is it's pushed it to the branch on stash, and it's automatically created a pull request or a merge request from the branch to the master. So we can actually go and see pull requests, or they're called pull requests. So this is the pull request that the system's just created, and you can see the you can see the change that I just committed. All right, so in the background, which is also something that's linked from the assets page, we actually have a continuous delivery environment. It's called a pipeline asset. And if we go, it's a Jenkins instance. Right now, it's just every story lands on one central Jenkins instance. One of the things where we want to do in a very near future is giving every user story its own Jenkins instance. That way, if you completely screw it up, then you won't actually bother any other teams except your own. And that's got 3 jobs in it. So it's got the seed job, the build job, and the publish report job. Now those jobs are defined by a project DSL file, which is essentially the Jenkins DSL plugin is something made by Netflix, which allows you to define Jenkins jobs in Groovy code. That's essentially what it is. So using this, if you put this in a predefined place in your project, in this case the flywheel directory, and then you can actually generate whatever kind of Jenkins jobs you want. And the system doesn't care what the Jenkins job does. The only thing it cares about is that there's a Docker container that comes out at the end. What you do between source code and the Docker container is completely up to you in terms of tests that you run, things that you do, et cetera, et cetera. In this case, it's fairly simple. We just have the seed job actually creates the jobs, and then we have a build job which ran here. And you can actually see if you look at the output, you can see that it created the Docker container from the new code, sent it to the registry that we have internally, and then it deployed. So if we now go back to the user story environment, which this is because you can tell by the DNS name, and we do an F5 on it. I'm rapidly running out of goat jokes. Let me do a little detour. So under the cover, what we do is essentially we have the Mayfly platform talking to Marathon. And Marathon is a framework for Mesos, which deploys deployable units, but in this case, Docker containers to your infrastructure. So if we go if we search for the story key, here you can see that we've got the same story key of the application name, and it's still deploying. That's probably why it's not up yet. You can see here that's the one running on our infrastructure right now. So then if we look at the Mesos interface, which is the sort of distributed framework underneath, we can search for the same thing, and you can see it running right there. So that's how we do things under the covers. That's how we create these isolated environments for these user stories. We actually started out with the idea that we would give every user story environment its own VM, but that was prohibitive in terms of resources. So then we moved to Docker, which was a much more sort of natural fit for the whole problem, because these things are really short-lived and they should be completely isolated from everything else. And that's essentially what Docker can offer you. Now let's see if it's actually. Apparently, it is having some problems deploying. Yeah, okay. Let me stall for just a, sorry? No, the pull request. So yeah, so that's a good point. So what it does is it's deploying the user story environment. So the code from the user story branch, it's deploying that to the user story environment itself. It's not doing any changes on master yet. So. Sorry? Forbidden error? Yeah, that's a long story, but that shouldn't matter. It was excellent, and it was good that you spotted that, but that really shouldn't matter. I have to see if I can. Is it, Maarten, when you work at, is it really transparent to the developers at home now? I'm sorry? Is it transparent to the developers at home? Do people have to log into Jenkins and Mesos, or do the developers just work away and they never need to check the issue? They never need to check Mesos and Marathon. That's completely transparent. They do check Jenkins because that's where they see if their build failed or not, and they can check, for instance, the logging, etc. But the actual stuff, the actual plumbing underneath, is not something they have to worry about. How stable is that? It's pretty stable. Yeah. So Mesos and Marathon is a combination that you hear a lot about, and that's actually a fairly proven combination. And we're just talking to it through its APIs, and it's pretty stable. Yeah. We're also running on top of CoreOS just to make it interesting, which is somewhat less stable, but it works, and people are using it. So I did another deploy. Let's see if that'll help things. In the meantime, so this flywheel directory has a couple of things. It has the project DSL. It has a service descriptor, which is actually it's still like an embryonic stage. Essentially, it just gives you a name, the amount of memory you require, the required amount of CPU shares, and a port that it opens. And this is so that service discovery can then find your service. And it has the definition of done. And like I said, the definition of done is something that we've tried to capture in a config file so that you can actually write down rules and have the system enforce them. And there's a bunch of stuff that we wrote at the beginning that we thought would be handy, but we've done it in such a way that it's actually extendable so that teams can write their own rules. So that, for example, if you want to write a rule that says we can only put a story through to production on a Wednesday, you can actually do that. But the standard rules are things like, all unit tests should pass, or someone from team XYZ should approve this merge request before it can actually be, before the story is actually done. And there should actually be a running service as proof that the code works before you can actually finish your story. So that's the 3 that are in here.
Do you use health checks?
Yeah. I was going to get to that in a moment. We actually use console underneath as well, but that's not as fleshed out yet as I would like it to be. So I was going to leave that out, but thank you for bringing that up. No, we use health checks in console as well as the health checks in Marathon. So apparently it's not going to cooperate, which is a shame. So I actually have a video of it working, so I might as well show that. It's unfortunate because I tested this. Anyway, maybe one of my colleagues deployed a new feature. Could be. Anyway. Sorry about this. Let me just go to the... All right. So make the user story, deploy it, and it actually, so it publishes it to the registry on the user story branch, and in the user story environment, it updates the application, and then finally when you what I can show you, by the way, sorry about that. So the DoD checking is done and integrated in Jira as well under the definition of done tab. So here you can see for the story that we're desperately trying to deploy at the moment, the unit tests actually pass. The feature branch is up to date with master. We have a mechanism that ensures that when you merge something to master, there will never be a merge conflict. And if you're interested in how we do that, I'm happy to explain a bit more after I'm finished. But one of the ways we do that is we check that your branch is actually up to date with master before you can merge to master, and we automatically push changes that come into master out to the feature branches, so that you can deal with the merge conflicts on your feature branch instead of in master. So the branch yields a valid artifact that can be deployed to pro, yet somehow isn't. And so there's 2 things that are still missing. The story environment should be alive and running, obviously, and the pull request must be approved by a member of DPI, which is the team I'm on. So I can actually go to stash. I can look at the pull request, and then I can say approve. And then if I go back, and this sends an event to the Mayfly platform, and then if I go back and refresh the definition of done, it says, hey, pull request is approved by a member of DPI. Yeah, so right now you can, but that's just the way the rule works. So if you implement the rule saying you cannot approve your own pull requests, then the rule is completely up to you how you configure it, essentially. So because otherwise I'd always have to bring a colleague to sort of do this. Yeah. Let me try it one more time, and if that doesn't work, well then I'll just... Sorry? Yeah. So when it's building, so it's building the Docker container, then pushing it to the registry, you should see it appear in Marathon. The last part is actually sending an event to the Mayfly platform, telling it there's a new container there that can be deployed. Sorry? Yeah, yeah. Okay, it tries to download something from the internet, but there's no internet for that machine, so that's why it says that. But that shouldn't matter. So we have a deployment. It says running, which, if that's true, would be awesome.
Something different.
It might not seem that way, but this is actually pretty promising. It's restarting the it's restarting the application. Can I do something to stall even more time? Oh yeah, something. So we've done a lot of work to actually integrate it into into Jira in a way that's sort of Jira native. So we have Jira has this thing called the activity stream, and so we have Mayfly posting messages in the activity stream so that later you can go back to the story and actually see what happened in the Mayfly platform as it relates to the story itself. So here you can see Mayfly blatantly lying about the fact that it deployed anything at all. No. Thank you for your patience. So, now that we've seen our story work on the user story environment, remember this is an isolated environment that's just running this application and nothing else, and it's just running this modified version of the application. We've seen it here. We wanted to deploy it to production, and we do that essentially by telling the system that it can merge the code to master. Okay, let me see if I can explain this clearly. We merge the code to master, but the way we do that is in such a way that there are never any merge conflicts. So when we merge it, the only delta between this user story branch and master is the code in that user story branch. Does that make sense? Okay. That means that once it's merged, the Docker container that we would build from master is exactly the same container as the one that we built from the branch. So we don't actually have to rebuild it. We can just use the branch container and deploy that as the master version, or as the production version. Did I explain that in a way that makes sense? Yeah? Fantastic. All right. So let's do that. So we say, we go to the definition of done. We see that, oh, this is, so if we try to resolve the issue now, it says, hey, the user story the story environment should be alive and running, and of course it is. It just, once you think it's fixed, it's still broken. That's fantastic. So, long story short, if you press this button called resolve, and if it actually, if everything passes, it will merge the code. It will do the cleanup and of all the assets, which means it will delete the branch. It will delete the user story environment on Marathon and on Mesos. It will delete all the pipeline artifacts in Jenkins, and it will move the container, or won't move the container, but it'll reinstantiate the container in the production environment, so that this would read this, essentially. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Are you all incredibly disappointed that I can't actually show you this? Have you sort of let go of any notion of ever working for ball.com ever in your life? Okay, let me go back to my presentation, which will hopefully work. So, do I still have a little bit of time, or? Okay, fantastic. So master is production. One of the things we hear a lot when we present this concept is that people say, you know, I need an integration testing environment, because I can't just deploy stuff to production, because how do I know it'll work? And to this I say, you do not need an integration testing environment. Or actually I say you already have one, but you just don't know it. So the way we used to develop at Bull, or bull.com, is we have these 4-week cycles, and we have 3 environments, and the versions move through those environments. So you have to really pay attention, because this animation is like completely subtle, but the little version numbers change. Yeah, I should really fix that to make it more obvious. But anyway, the versions move through the environments one by one, and every 4 weeks we move stuff over, and then we move stuff from the development to integration. We used to spend 2 weeks testing stuff in integration, and then finally we moved to production. So if you want to do continuous delivery in a way in which every team has the ability to actually to deploy their service to production whenever they want, you get the following problem. Because integration testing means you're testing a fixed version, a known matrix of versions of all your applications together for a certain amount of time. So then you move to a continuous delivery model where all the teams might not necessarily be on the same release cycle. So we have the first team, which is still in the 4-week cycle, the second team, which might be in a 4-day cycle, the third team, which is a Mexican outsourced team, which is on the Mayan calendar, and nobody knows when they release, but they do. And then the fourth team, which just basically releases whenever it feels like it. And then when you fix those versions for any amount of time, and you want to do your integration testing, you're actually blocking any team that wants to release at that moment. So you're reducing the velocity of deployment. And that's if you get sufficiently large service-oriented architecture, that's not something you want to do, because people might be releasing at any time, and they might be releasing critical bug fixes, et cetera, et cetera. The added value of testing something together in a fixed version matrix becomes where there is still added value, but it doesn't weigh up to the detriment that you cause by disallowing people to deploy when you want to do your integration testing. So the teams that are not in this cycle, the teams that take less time to deploy than it does to do your integration testing, will actually be blocked by this. And then the question becomes, what is the point of integration testing at all if you don't know what you're testing at any particular time? If you have your integration testing environment and versions are constantly changing, you essentially have to either make sure your integration tests all run within the amount of time it takes a new team to deploy a new version, and you have no idea what that is, or you have to say to yourself, well, I don't know what I'm testing, but I'm just going to run those tests just because it makes me feel good, which doesn't make a lot of sense. But then it turns out you already have an integration testing environment. I heard someone say it in the back. Yeah.
Yeah, and we do this all the time.
Ah.
Horrible. Seems horrible.
Your integration testing environment with load that is very much production-like is actually called production. And there's a bunch of drawbacks to doing your integration testing in production, but if you can make it work in the sense that you have published APIs that your services adhere to, you have a system like, for example, Mayfly that gives you a production-like environment for every user story, you have good tests that can run in isolation from the rest of the environment, then we think, and that's why we built Mayfly like it's built, and we think you can actually make this work. And there's a lot of benefits to doing it like this. And the chief benefit is that everybody can just deploy whenever they feel like it. So, the current state of Mayfly. It's in beta stage development. You may have noticed there's still a few bugs to be worked out. The scope is limited right now to simple services, and actually in the past month we've added databases. So whenever you get a user story environment, you can instantiate the service there, and then you get a database to go along with it. And one of our colleagues has developed a sort of database as a service platform that we use to do that. We're dogfooding it, obviously. We're using our own services and developing those on the Mayfly. The Mayfly services themselves are being developed on Mayfly. And then we have about 12 other services from around 6 or 7 other teams that are being used on the platform. And the future is basically adding ever more services. At a certain point, we'd like to get all the services within Bol on the platform because we think there's a lot of value in working that way. And the teams that are using it now agree. We're working towards making it production ready, fleshing out the monitoring. We're actually, in the past month, we started to use Prometheus, which is a monitoring tool that's very, we've essentially gone full hipster on the monitoring because we're using Prometheus. But it's actually a really interesting tool. And we're doing a bunch of stuff in terms of discovery, service discovery, and increasing the isolation of the actual user story environments. Oh, yeah. And we're going to open source it, like I said at the beginning, and as Jamie has promised on my behalf. We'll do that sometime during the end of this year, so probably in November or December. We're going to just dump all the source code on GitHub and do some tooling around it so you can actually run it in an easy way. Before you clap, if you were going to clap in the first place, let me check if, by chance, my colleague has sacrificed another goat and I can actually show you the... Let's try that again. Nope. Sorry.
Any questions for Maarten?
Questions? I don't know if this already came up in the presentation, I might have missed it, but does it work with other continuous integration services?
You mean apart from Jenkins?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it doesn't at the moment. But what we've done, the platform consists of 5 services, which all have the service that talks to Jenkins has been made pluggable in a way that it's really easy to swap out the Jenkins implementation for, let's say, a cruise control or a Bamboo implementation. So we've at every point that we touch an external system, like Jira or like Marathon or like Jenkins, we've gone through a fair bit of work to make sure that the actual implementation of the connector is pluggable in a way that you can swap it out and you can use, for instance, GitHub issues instead of Jira, or you can use Aurora instead of Marathon. Or
Yeah,
so
when you make it open source, people will write plugins like hell. So.
That is the idea, yes.
That's how it works.
Any more questions?
Can you make that website public?
Which website?
The Hello World page? It doesn't have to be on bol.com.
That's good, because I'll probably get fired if I do that.
That's my startup.
You'll have to ask my colleague Reinier, who I think owns the intellectual property to this particular.
Maybe you could put it in the Docker registry and they can download it tomorrow.
Yes, that is something that will never happen. But yes, let's just pretend that will happen.
That's what I do. Okay. Any more questions? No, then I think a big round of applause for Maarten.